Our reading this morning is from 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 to 16. Now Elijah, the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word." Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Leave here, turn eastward and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have ordered the ravens to feed you there." So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Sometime later, the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, "Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food." So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar, so I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small cake of bread for me, from what you have, and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land." She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Amen. I'll call upon Keith now to bring the message. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Marion, for that reading. Today we honour firstly our own mothers, and then the mothers of this church family. For many it's a happy day, but for some it's not so happy. It can be very, very painful. And I just pray this word will be a blessing to them, to encourage them, and to let them know that really the Lord does love them in their state of disappearance. I'm sorry, I forgot to put the mic on. Can you hear me all right? No? Can you hear me at the back? I'll try to speak a bit louder then. I forgot to put the mic on, sorry. There's an old Jewish proverb which says, God could not be everywhere. It's not biblical, this proverb. God could not be everywhere, and therefore he made mothers. There was a story going around some years ago. It was about an editor of of a London newspaper. He once submitted a list of teachers to Winston Churchill, the list of teachers that he'd had throughout his life, so he could approve it and then publish it. Winston Churchill evidently took the list, and after looking at it, he handed it back to him and said, "You forgot, omitted to mention the most important teacher in my life, my mother." And that's absolutely true. I'm sure all of our mothers have taught us something in our childhood, a variety of important things on a wide range of topics as well. And here's just a few things that they probably taught us as we were younger, and I got these off Google. She taught logic. If everyone else jumped off the cliff, would you do it too? She taught us how to pay attention. Because I said so, that's why. She even taught us health care. If you stare at that TV much longer, your eyes will go square. She taught us fall. Make sure you put clean underwear on, you might get into an accident. She taught us genetics. Just wait till your father gets home. I'm sorry, I've told you that wrong. It says, she taught us genetics. You're just like your father. She taught us the rules of the countryside. Shut that door after you wasn't born in a barn. And then she taught us anticipation. This is the anticipation one. Just wait till your father gets home. She taught us payback. One day you'll have kids, and I hope they're just like you. And she taught us the importance of prayer. You better pray that stain comes on that carpet. Humorous ones, some of them. In the Bible, though, there are many, many great models of motherhood for us to be inspired by. We can learn boldness from the mother of James and John, who boldly asked Jesus to grant her 2 sons, seeks to sit on his right side and his left side in his future kingdom. We were taught how to pray by broken-hearted Hannah. She hadn't been able to bear her husband any children, as she was barren. And out of her anguish, she poured out her heart to God. And she promised God that if he granted her a child, she would dedicate him to the Lord's service for their entire life. And she kept that promise by dedicating her son Samuel to God. And God honoured her all through her life and blessed her with 5 more children. We can learn loyalty because this is displayed by Ruth the Moabite, who left the comfort and safety of her homeland to move with her mother-in-law back to her own land, where Ruth no doubt was very much rejected because she knew nobody. But God granted her favour. And not only did he give her a husband, he also gave her a son. And she ended up being the great-grandmother of King David. These are just a few examples of the many wonderful named women in the Bible who can teach us, both men and women, many different things. But this morning I want to briefly look at the courage and faith of a woman who is unnamed. We know she's a widow, and that she wasn't aware of the fact that God had plans for her life. She was minding her own business, trying to provide for her son and herself in the midst of the widespread famine that has swept across the land for the past 3 years. But despite her best efforts, she'd come to a very last portion of food. Things had become really desperate for her when God stepped in and demonstrated his love for her and his awareness of her needs. Because it wasn't customary for a stranger, particularly a man, to speak to a woman, she became afraid. But we read in verse 13 of 1 Kings, Elijah said to the woman, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid." Someone once said that there are 366 instances in the Bible where God tells people not to be afraid, 366 times. So So I'm sure God certainly wants us to heed that reassurance that he provides. What God often does is to bring us right to the edge of our fears, to a point where we're unable to undertake a certain something in our own strength and resources. And then he teaches all of us that he is enough in all things. And this occasion is no exception. But why does God work in this way? Well, he does it this way because if we were always able to provide our own needs, then we wouldn't learn to be reliant upon God. We need to remember that there is no situation that he cannot put right or ease. There's nothing wrong with being reliant on God for things or to call upon his name for help. Quite the reverse, because it enables God to show how much he loves us and how much he cares for us. In the very first sermon that God and Jesus preached, he opened up with these words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now that's some attention-grabbing sentence of anybody's sermon. Poor in spirit. You see, in those days, poverty was seen to be a curse from God, and wealth was seen to be a blessing or a stamp of approval by God. But as we know, God just doesn't work like that. In that statement, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," God is saying, blessed are you when you're at your wit's end with worry and anxiety. But it's when we come to the end of ourselves and we don't know what to do, that's the time when Jesus meets us there. Because then there's finally room in our lives for him when he shows up. If we were full of ourselves with a "we can do this" attitude and trying to muscle our way through the situation that we're in, then there's no room for Jesus to enter into it, to take control and to sort it out. We know that God will never force himself onto us. We need to invite him to come and have authority and control over every situation in our lives. Most of us, I'm sure, would prefer not to be poor in spirit, though. We don't want to be destitute or not able to figure things out for ourselves, because in people's eyes that will reflect badly on us all. But what about the other end of the spectrum, the rich in spirit? They're the kind of people that may come over as being prideful, with their noses stuck in the air and always looking down at others. And we know that God despises those kind of people. So we'd probably prefer to be the middle class in spirit. That way we can keep God neatly in our back pocket to go to him when we really need him. We want God to be our co-pilot, as it were, assisting us to get through the storms of life. But Jesus didn't offer us that sort of help to make things easy, our lives easier. He defined what it meant to be a follower of his in Luke chapter 9, verses 23 and 24. And it reads like this. Then he said to them all, "Whoever wants to be a disciple must deny himself and take up their cross daily and follow me." And this doctrine means that whatever agenda we might have for our own life, we need to take up God's agenda as individuals. That's what Jesus did every day of his life here on earth. And that's what Elijah had been doing for the past 3 years. We heard that every day for those 3 years, ravens would come and bring him bread and meat. And Elijah, through that experience, has certainly learned total dependency upon the Lord during that time. And the widow woman in our story as well, she was at this very same point. She was down to the very last morsel of food. The cupboard was bare. There was no food banks in those days. Elijah encountered her at the very brink of her desperate life. She was gathering sticks, we heard, for a fire to cook the last meal, and then that would be it. She would be able to do no more. The end was just around the corner. She and her son would stop to get together after the last meal. But then God brings Elijah onto the scene. He had learned to be totally dependent upon God. And he was the right person to meet up with this desperate widow. But again, we must ask ourselves why? Why did God work it out this way? Did God run out of meat and bread to feed Elijah? Of course not. Were the ravens on strike, or had they flown away? No, of course not. Then why did God decide to quit feeding Elijah? And why did God choose this desperate widow of all people to be asked to provide Elijah with his next meal? Why not call upon a well-to-do couple instead? Well, he didn't do it that way because the well-off couple wouldn't have learned the lessons and appreciated the blessings that this penniless widow would have. And in fact, she did. God told Elijah that he had prearranged and commanded this woman to provide food for him. But in the conversation between the two of them, it doesn't appear that she is following God's command here. You see, God doesn't normally work this way. We don't hear an audible command from God, but he prompts our hearts and puts us in the right place at the right time to receive his blessing and to see his love demonstrated through the actions of others. And yet here in that scenario, it still depended on the widow's response to Elijah's request. What if she said no to his request for some bread? Well, if she had done that, then she would have missed out on God's blessing and his deepening of her faith. At this point, let me ask you something. How has God used situations to teach you dependence upon him in the past? And where perhaps is he leading you right now to receive his blessing and to learn a greater level of dependence upon him? That's an interesting question that you can ponder on for the rest of the day probably. Notice that Elijah asked him what Elijah asked her to do. He asked her for the first to make a loaf for him, and then go back to make a loaf for herself and her son, and to trust God to provide enough oil and flour to make more loaves for the days ahead. That's some faith that she got to have in there. She had to have the faith and the trust to go away and to do just as Elijah asked her. Would you or I do that, I wonder? Consider that for a moment. I don't know about anyone here this morning, but I personally might have to seriously think that over for a few minutes before doing it or not doing it. But this desperate widow didn't appear to hesitate. She went back home and did as Elijah had asked her. It's obviously, from what she said earlier, that she only had enough flour and oil for one loaf. So it follows that when she made the loaf for Elijah, the flour jar and the oil jar were both empty. However, when she returned from giving Elijah his loaf, there was enough flour and oil to make another loaf for herself and her son. I wonder if you've ever thought, if you've read this story before, whether God had actually filled the containers right to the brim. I don't think he did. I imagine God just giving enough each time for one more loaf of bread. Because it's never about the amount of flour and oil that God will provide. It's just more about learning to depend upon God. God has always considered reliance upon him as being very important in a person's life, and especially in giving as well. You see, God isn't as concerned about what we give or how much we give as to why we give. Because he knows that if we give out of faith and gratitude and with joy, and we give it sacrificially and abundantly. And this isn't just in terms of money, it also means our time, our compassion for and concern for others. The amount of time we spend in prayer and reading his word, all of these and more are ways of worshipping and giving to God. One day, Jesus and his disciples were sat outside the temple, watching the people go into the temple and dropping their financial offerings into a container. And I can imagine some of these people actually using all their small change so it sounded as if they were giving a lot, and to make everybody impressed with all the honey and the money at the bottom of the container. But if you know the reading, you'll know that Jesus only commented on one person who was a widow, and she gave the last 2 coins that she had. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 43 and 44, it reads this. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty, putting everything, all she had to live on." In monetary terms, this poor woman didn't put more in than anyone else, but she gave sacrificially to God. There was no law at that time that required her to give her last 2 coins. She gave them trusting that God would continue to sustain her life. Yes, it's never been about the amount of money at all. It's been about what's in the heart at the time of giving. The Bible doesn't tell us what happened to the woman, but no doubt God blessed her mightily, just as he did the widow who fed Elijah. For that widow, every day God gave her enough to sustain her for that day. She definitely learned the power of Jesus' prayer when he asked, "Give us this day our daily bread." Most of us believe we could provide for our daily bread, but here's 2 examples where neither of them could, unless God stepped in and provided for it. And that's where our faith grows tremendously deeper. When you and I need God to show up and come through, because if he didn't, it's all over. We need to wait upon God. Now, waiting on God can be scary at times, but it also can be a remarkable time of growth in our faith and our trust. Most of the hymns we've got this morning have been about trust, faith and love of the Lord. Quite provisional, actually. So, coming towards the end, I need to ask you another question this morning. In what area of your life are you trusting in God? In what area of your life are you totally dependent on God? Isaiah chapter 41 verse 13 reads, "For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your hands and says to you, 'Do not fear, I will help you.'" We've just heard in the first part of chapter 17, but can I encourage you to read through to the end of chapter 17 when you're at home, because although God continues daily to provide enough flour and oil for the 3 of them to live on, it seems that the widow and Elijah still need to go deeper into their dependency and trust in God. And you'll see why if you read to the end of the chapter. Not only can we see in our story this morning, but also through the life of every believer, one of the most important things God wants for everyone, whether man or woman, mother or father, it's a deeper relationship with him through their daily dependence upon him, and then pass it on, that valuable lesson, to our children and grandchildren as well. Our children, especially in today's world, desperately need to see Christ living in us all and reflected to them. They need to see the depth of our faith as they see us as they see us depending on God for our daily needs. As they see as that in all of us, will be passing that on, one of the greatest lessons anyone, mother or father, can ever teach a child, and that is to have complete faith and dependency upon God. Amen.